Imagine a battlefield where the most formidable adversaries aren't those with the largest weapons or the most powerful tanks, but rather warriors who glide like phantoms and strike with the force of a storm from a reality their enemies can't even begin to grasp. Before we delve into this narrative, known by few and uttered by even fewer, I have a crucial request. First, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'm eager to discover which corners of the globe are unearthing these profound truths. Second, please hit that subscribe button. Your subscription is more than just a number, it's the lifeline that enables us to keep unearthing these clandestine tales, stories that powerful entities have striven to suppress for decades. Now, let's commence. The year was 1943, and the European conflict had reached a stalemate where conventional strategies were failing. The German Wehrmacht had established seemingly unassailable fortifications across Italy. Allied commanders were sacrificing thousands of men in fruitless frontal assaults, gaining nothing but casualties and despair. Yet, deep within the mountains of New Mexico, Colonel Harrison Webb, a recruitment officer, received orders that would irrevocably alter the course of events. His mission, simple in theory but impossible in practice, was to locate warriors capable of feats no ordinary soldier could achieve. He was to find the Apaches. The initial recorded confrontation between German forces and Apache soldiers occurred on the night of September 14, 1943, near the modest village of Monte Cassino. Private First Class Wilhelm Richter, manning a forward observation post, observed something that would forever haunt him. The American front lines were over 2 miles away. No patrol could have traversed the open terrain undetected. Yet, by morning light, 3 German sentries were discovered deceased. There was no blood, no bullet wounds. Their eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of sheer terror, and their throats bore marks that the field medic couldn't decipher. The official German report attributed the deaths to unknown circumstances. However, Private Richter inscribed a different account in his personal journal, a document that only surfaced in 1987 when his grandson unearthed it from an old trunk. The entry stated, "They materialized from thin air. I vigilantly watched the darkness for 6 hours. Nothing stirred. Not a single blade of grass, not a shadow. Yet, at dawn, 3 men lay dead, and not one of us heard a sound. Whatever extinguished their lives was not human. It couldn't have been human." Colonel Webb had enlisted 14 Apache men from the reservations of Arizona and New Mexico. Their names were never officially documented in military records. They were simply designated as Special Reconnaissance Unit 7. Among themselves, however, they retained their Apache names, names imbued with the legacy of generations of warriors. Their leader was a man named Goyakla, meaning one who yawns in Apache, though he possessed an undeniable alertness. At 42, he was considered ancient by military standards, but his gaze held a piercing intensity that caused younger men to avert their eyes. The training these men underwent was unlike anything the United States Army had ever conceived. For 6 months, they resided in the New Mexico mountains, far removed from any military base or official installation. Their instructors were not military personnel, but elders from the reservation, men who remembered the ancient ways, the traditions of Geronimo and Cochise, the methods of warriors who had resisted the entire United States Army for decades with nothing but courage, cunning, and an intimate understanding of the land. What they learned couldn't be found in any manual. They mastered breath control to such an extent that their chests would remain still for minutes at a time. They learned to traverse any terrain without displacing a single stone or leaf. They learned to discern the enemy not through binoculars or radio intercepts, but through subtle cues that most men overlooked. The flight patterns of birds, the direction of smoke, the almost imperceptible ground vibrations that signaled approaching footsteps miles away. But there was another aspect to their training, something the Army documents never mentioned, and that the men themselves rarely discussed. They learned the ancient ceremonies, the rituals their ancestors had employed before battle for millennia, rituals that invoked powers the modern world had long forgotten. The second engagement transpired 3 weeks after Monte Cassino. A German armored division had fortified a stronghold in a valley, controlling the only passable road for 50 miles. Allied bombers had attempted to neutralize it. Artillery had relentlessly bombarded the position for days. Nothing proved effective. The Germans were too deeply entrenched, and every infantry assault had been repelled with catastrophic casualties. On the night of October 7, 1943, the 14 Apache warriors were deployed. Their directives were straightforward. Gather intelligence and report back. No engagement, No offensive action, just observation. But what unfolded that night was neither simple nor anticipated. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Freeman was the commanding officer who received the after-action report. A career soldier who had witnessed combat in the First World War, he considered himself impervious to surprise. Yet, as he perused the report submitted by Captain David White, the sole non-Apache officer assigned to observe the unit, his hands began to tremble. The report stated that at 2,200 hours, the unit had departed the forward base. By 22:15 hours, they had vanished. Captain White had tracked their movements for approximately 300 yards before losing all trace of them. For the subsequent 6 hours, he had waited at the designated extraction point, encountering neither sound nor sight. At 0400 hours, just before dawn, the Apache warriors reappeared. They carried documents, maps, and equipment that could only have originated from within the German command post. They had captured a German officer, a major named Klaus Briener, who was in a state of catatonic shock. Medical personnel later examined him, finding no physical injuries. However, Major Briener never spoke again. He spent the remainder of his life in a psychiatric facility in Munich, refusing to gaze at anyone with dark hair or eyes, screaming whenever the lights were extinguished. The documents retrieved by the Apache warriors contained intricate blueprints for German defensive positions spanning a 200-mile front. This intelligence proved pivotal in the Allied advance through Italy in the ensuing months. However, the army was more preoccupied with another enigma. How had 14 men infiltrated a fortified position defended by over 300 German soldiers without firing a single shot? How had they extracted a senior officer from his own headquarters without anyone noticing until morning? Captain White's supplementary report, immediately classified and destined to remain so for 40 years, attempted to unravel these questions. His words, preserved in the National Archives under a file officially declared non-existent, painted a picture that defied rational explanation. I have served alongside soldiers from every conceivable background this nation offers. I have witnessed courage and skill in forms that would astound civilian comprehension. But what I observed with Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 transcends any category I possess. These men do not operate within the established parameters of warfare. They function within an entirely different framework, one that predates our civilization and adheres to rules we cannot perceive. The German High Command became increasingly aware of an unusual phenomenon on the Italian front. Reports from surviving soldiers spoke of shadows moving against the wind, of enemies appearing inside secured bunkers without passing through any entrance, of sentries who simply vanished, only to be found days later miles from their posts, alive but utterly broken, unable to recall anything except an unsettling sensation of being observed by eyes that were not human. In December of 1943, the Wehrmacht issued a classified directive to all units in the Italian theater. The directive acknowledged the presence of what it termed Native American Special Forces and outlined countermeasures. These countermeasures were extensive and born of desperation. Double the sentries, triple the perimeter patrols, maintain constant fires, and never allow a man to stand watch alone. The directive concluded with a sentence that eloquently conveyed the psychological impact the Apache warriors were having. Under no circumstances should any soldier pursue these enemies into darkness or wooded terrain. Such pursuit will result in the loss of the soldier and potentially compromise unit integrity. However, the Germans failed to comprehend the true nature of their adversaries. The Apache warriors were not merely highly skilled soldiers, they were something far older and infinitely more perilous. They were the inheritors of a tradition honed over millennia, a tradition that recognized no distinction between the physical and the spiritual, between the visible and the unseen. Goyakla, the unit's leader, had been raised by his grandfather, a man who had fought alongside Geronimo in the final Apache Wars. His grandfather had imparted knowledge that was never written down, wisdom passed down through generations via ceremony and practice. He had taught him that a warrior does not battle solely with his physical body, he fights with his spirit, and a properly trained spirit can achieve feats the body cannot. The third major engagement transpired in February of 1944. A German SS division had seized a village named San Pietro, employing the civilian populace as human shields while reinforcing their position. Allied commanders faced an impossible dilemma. Assault the village and sacrifice hundreds of innocent lives, or bypass it and leave the German forces free to menace supply lines. The Apache warriors presented a third alternative. What transpired in San Pietro over the 3 nights of February 18 through 20 has never been fully reconstructed. The German garrison comprised 212 soldiers. When American forces finally entered the village on the morning of February 21, they discovered all 212 dead. The civilians were unharmed. Not a single building had been damaged. Not a single shot had been fired. The German soldiers had perished in various states of terror. Some had evidently run until their hearts gave out. Others had turned their weapons upon themselves. A few appeared to have simply ceased breathing, their faces contorted in expressions suggesting they had witnessed something beyond human comprehension. The village priest, Father Antonio Benedetti, would later recount that night in a letter to his bishop. He wrote of hearing singing in an unfamiliar language, a low, pervasive chanting that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. He had seen lights drifting through the streets, lights that cast no shadows and had no discernible source. And he had felt a presence, ancient and terrifying, yet somehow sacred, sweeping through the village like a cleansing wind. The church suppressed Father Benedetti's letter, but copies circulated among Vatican officials for years. Some posited that the events in San Pietro were a miracle. Others suggested something far more disquieting. That the ancient gods, the spirits that had governed this land before the advent of Christianity, had returned to settle old scores. The Apache warriors themselves never discussed San Pietro with outsiders. But decades later, one of them, a man named Joseph Nez, granted a single interview to a researcher from the University of New Mexico. His words were recorded on tape, and that tape mysteriously vanished from the university archives in 1992. However, a transcript survived, tucked away in the personal files of the researcher who conducted the interview. In it, Joseph Nez uttered something that generated more questions than answers. "We did not kill those men. We merely showed them what was always there, the darkness inherent in all men, the fear that the modern world has taught them to suppress. We opened a door, and what emerged from that door was not us. It was something else. Something that had been patiently waiting for a very long time." By the spring of 1944, the reputation of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 had permeated the European theater. Allied commanders sought their deployment for the most seemingly impossible missions. German soldiers surrendered rather than defend positions where they believed the Apache warriors might appear. And unsettling rumors began to circulate, tales that official historians would later dismiss as wartime hysteria, but which those who experienced them would never forget. A tank crew reported encountering a figure standing in the middle of a road at midnight, a figure clad in traditional Native American attire that had not been worn for generations. As they approached, the figure vanished, and their tank engine died, refusing to restart until dawn. A pilot claimed he had witnessed men running alongside his aircraft at 5,000 feet, keeping pace with his plane before disappearing into non-existent clouds. A German general committed suicide in his headquarters, leaving a note that simply read, "They are in my room. They are always in my room. They will never leave." The Psychological Warfare Division of the Army grew interested in these reports. If the Apache warriors were exerting such a devastating effect on enemy morale, perhaps their methods could be analyzed and replicated. A team of psychologists and anthropologists was assembled to observe and document the actions of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7. The team arrived at the unit's base camp in May of 1944, eager to apply scientific methodology to what they presumed was a combination of exceptional fieldcraft and clever psychological manipulation. The team leader was Dr. Harold Whitmore, a psychology professor from Columbia University who had advised the Army on various projects related to enemy morale and propaganda. He was a rational man, a man who believed that all phenomena could be explained through meticulous observation and logical analysis. He meticulously kept detailed notes of his time with the Apache warriors, notes that would later be sealed under the highest classification the United States government possessed. His first entry, dated May 15, 1944, read: "Arrived at base camp. Unit consists of 14 Native American males, ages ranging from approximately 25 to 45. They received us politely but with obvious reservations. Their demeanor is unlike any military personnel I have encountered. They move with a deliberation and awareness that suggests training far beyond standard infantry preparation. Will begin formal observations tomorrow." His second entry, dated May 16, read: "Attempted to observe morning routine. Unit had already departed for unknown location when we awoke at 0500 hours. No one in camp could tell us when they left or where they went. Sentries claimed they did not see them leave. This is concerning, as the sentries were specifically instructed to monitor all movement. His third entry, dated May 17, read: Unit returned at midday. Requested permission to observe their preparation for tonight's mission. Leader, known as Goyakla, agreed. What followed was unlike anything in my experience. The men gathered in a circle and began a low chanting that continued for approximately 3 hours. During this time, I observed physiological changes that I cannot explain. Heart rates dropped to levels that should have rendered them unconscious. Body temperatures decreased measurably, and at certain points, I could have sworn I saw figures standing among them that had not been there before. I am attributing this to fatigue and the hypnotic effect of the chanting. I am certain there is a rational explanation. His fourth entry, dated May 18, was the last one he wrote. The previous night, he had been permitted to accompany the unit on a reconnaissance mission. His handwriting in this entry was erratic, barely legible in places. The words he inscribed would forever haunt everyone who later read them. I was wrong about everything. There is no rational explanation. They walked through a wall, not around it, through it. I saw them do it. One moment they were on one side, the next moment they were on the other. The wall was solid. I touched it. It was solid stone. But they passed through it as if it were smoke. And that was not the worst part. The worst part was what I saw on the other side. The things that were waiting there, the things they spoke to. I cannot write what I saw. I cannot write what I heard. I can only say that our understanding of reality is incomplete. There are layers we do not perceive. There are entities we do not acknowledge. And these men, these Apache warriors, they know how to access those layers. They know how to speak to those entities. God help us all if they ever decide to use that knowledge against us. Dr. Whitmore returned to the United States the following week. He never spoke of his time with Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 to anyone. He resigned from Columbia University and relocated to a small town in Vermont, where he spent the remaining 30 years of his life tending a garden and steadfastly refusing to answer questions about his wartime service. When he died in 1974, his personal effects included a single object that his family couldn't explain. A small leather pouch containing items they didn't recognize, items that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, items that were warm to the touch, even in the coldest room. The war in Europe persisted, and Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 continued its impossible missions. They operated in France after D-Day, forging paths through German defenses that military analysts later concluded could not have been breached by any conventional means. They operated in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge, providing intelligence that saved thousands of American lives. And they operated in Germany itself during the final push to Berlin, accomplishing feats that no official history would ever document. But something was subtly shifting among the Apache warriors themselves. The longer they fought, the more they seemed to retreat from the surrounding world. They spoke less to other soldiers. They ate separately. They slept during the day and moved exclusively at night. Captain White, who had been with them from the outset, noted in his reports that they seemed to be burdened by a growing weight, a weight that was not physical but spiritual. In his final report, dated April 30, 1945, the day Adolf Hitler died in his bunker in Berlin, Captain White inscribed something that would remain classified for over half a century. I fear we have demanded too much of these men. We have compelled them to open doors that perhaps should have remained shut. We have asked them to invoke forces that were never intended to serve modern warfare. And I believe that those forces have extracted a price. A price that these men are still paying and will continue to pay long after the guns have fallen silent. I recommend that Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 be immediately disbanded and that all records of their service be sealed. Not to safeguard military secrets, but to preserve the sanity of anyone who might attempt to replicate their actions. Some knowledge is too perilous to be known. Some powers are too dreadful to be wielded. And some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. The war concluded in May of 1945. But for the 14 Apache warriors of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7, the cessation of hostilities brought no peace. They returned to the United States on a transport ship that traversed the Atlantic in 12 days. And during those 12 days, the other soldiers on board learned to avoid them. Not out of disrespect, but out of an instinctive fear that none of them could articulate. The Apache warriors remained in a section of the ship that other men found reasons to shun. The lights in that section perpetually flickered. The temperature plummeted 10 degrees whenever someone approached. And at night, the crew reported hearing sounds from below decks, sounds that didn't resemble any human voice, sounds that seemed to emanate from a great distance and a very long time ago. When the ship docked in New York Harbor on June 3, 1945, the 14 warriors disembarked separately from the other soldiers. They were met not by family or friends, but by a convoy of unmarked vehicles that transported them to a facility in upstate New York. The facility bore no official name. It appeared on no maps, and what transpired there over the subsequent 3 months would remain one of the most rigorously guarded secrets in American military history. The Army sought to comprehend what Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 had accomplished during the war. More importantly, they wanted to ascertain if it could be replicated. If 14 men could achieve what these warriors had achieved, imagine the capabilities of an entire division. Imagine an army that could pass through walls, that could instill terror in enemies without firing a shot, that could access powers beyond the physical realm. The possibilities were boundless. The implications were staggering. The man entrusted with this research was General Thomas Hartwell, a veteran of both world wars who had forged his career on unconventional thinking. He assembled a team of scientists, psychologists, anthropologists, and military strategists. He brought in consultants from fields the Army had never before considered relevant to warfare. He secured funding that bypassed normal channels and reported directly to individuals whose names never appeared in any official document. And he initiated a systematic study of the Apache warriors that would consume the next 90 days of his life. The initial interviews yielded nothing. The warriors answered questions politely but divulged nothing of substance. They described their missions in terms that could have applied to any reconnaissance unit. They attributed their success to training and teamwork. They denied anything unusual had occurred. General Hartwell knew they were prevaricating, but he couldn't prove it, and he couldn't compel them to speak. These men had earned more medals than any unit in the European theater. They were heroes. They could not be coerced. So, General Hartwell attempted a different approach. He enlisted Apache elders from the reservations, hoping they might persuade the warriors to cooperate. But the elders, after spending a single afternoon with the returned soldiers, refused to participate further. One of them, a man named Thomas Yellowhorse, who was nearly 90 years old and remembered the final surrender of Geronimo, spoke privately with General Hartwell before departing. His words were captured by a hidden microphone, a recording that would surface decades later in a Freedom of Information Act request that was partially granted and largely redacted. Thomas Yellowhorse said, "You do not grasp what you are requesting. These men did what was necessary. They invoked the ancient powers, the powers our people have known since before your ancestors learned to write. But those powers are not tools to be used and discarded. They are relationships. They are bonds. And once those bonds are formed, they cannot be severed. These men are no longer entirely within your world. A part of them walks in another place now, a place where your science cannot follow. A place where your ambition will only sow destruction. Let them return home. Let them strive to find peace. And pray that what they brought back with them does not spread." General Hartwell disregarded this warning. He intensified his research. He ordered medical examinations that revealed anomalies the doctors couldn't explain. The warriors exhibited heart rates that plummeted to single digits during sleep, yet showed no signs of distress. Their brain wave patterns displayed frequencies that didn't correspond to any known state of consciousness. And their blood, when analyzed under microscopes, contained structures that the laboratory technicians initially believed were contamination until they realized the structures were moving autonomously. On the 47th day of the study, an event transpired that altered everything. A young researcher named Dr. Elizabeth Crane was conducting a routine interview with one of the warriors, a man called Dashalnisha, when she noticed something in his eyes, a flicker, a movement, as if something behind his eyes was gazing out at her. She inquired what he was contemplating. He smiled and said, "I am thinking about the door." She asked, "What door?" He replied, "The door we opened in Europe." The door that never closed. It is still open, Dr. Crane. And sometimes things come through. That night, Dr. Crane experienced the first of what would become a series of incidents that permeated the research facility over the subsequent weeks. She awoke at precisely 3 o'clock in the morning to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure was tall and slender, clad in clothing that seemed to belong to another century, another world. It did not move. It did not speak. It simply observed her with eyes that reflected no light. She screamed, and when the guards arrived moments later, the figure was gone. But the temperature in her room had plummeted to below freezing. And on her window, etched in frost that should not have been possible in June, were words in a language that the base linguist later identified as archaic Apache. The words translated to "We see you now." Over the next 2 weeks, 17 members of the research staff reported similar experiences. Figures in their rooms at night, voices whispering in languages they didn't comprehend, objects moving on their own. And always, the unsettling sensation of being observed by something that was not human. 3 researchers requested immediate transfers. 2 others simply vanished, their belongings left behind, their whereabouts never discovered. And Dr. Crane herself suffered a nervous breakdown that would keep her institutionalized for the next 8 years. General Hartwell finally grasped what Thomas Yellowhorse had tried to convey. The Apache warriors had not simply mastered unusual techniques, they had forged connections with forces that existed outside normal reality, forces that had followed them back from Europe. Forces that were now spreading beyond the warriors themselves, affecting anyone who came too close. On the 91st day, General Hartwell made a decision that he would later describe as the most difficult of his career. He ordered Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 disbanded. He ordered all research materials destroyed. He ordered every member of his team to sign documents swearing them to eternal secrecy under penalty of treason. And he personally drove the 14 Apache warriors to a train station in Albany, New York, where they boarded a westbound train that would carry them home to the reservations. Before their departure, Goyakla, the unit's leader, spoke to General Hartwell one final time. His words were not recorded, but General Hartwell transcribed them from memory that same night in a personal journal that his family would discover after his death in 1971. Goyakla said, "You desired to know our secrets, General. You wish to employ what we know. But some knowledge cannot be used. It can only be carried. We carry it now. We will carry it until we die. And when we die, it will pass to our children, and to their children, and to all the generations that follow. This is the price we paid to save your soldiers in Europe. This is the burden we accepted when we answered your call. Do not feel guilt, General. We understood what we were doing. We knew the cost. But comprehend this. The door we opened does not close simply because the war is over. The things that came through that door are still here. They will always be here. And they are watching. They are always watching." The 14 warriors returned to their reservations in Arizona and New Mexico. They attempted to resume normal lives. They worked jobs, raised families, attended community events. But they were never the same. Their neighbors noticed changes. The warriors no longer slept at night. They would be seen traversing the desert at all hours, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, always heading in directions that seemed to have no destination. Their children experienced nightmares that were too similar to be coincidence, nightmares about figures in the dark, about doors that should not be opened, about voices speaking in languages that had not been used for generations. And then the deaths began. The first to die was a man named Samuel Chi, who had been the youngest member of the unit at 23. He was found in his home on the reservation in October of 1946. The official cause of death was heart failure, but the circumstances were unusual. Samuel Chi had been discovered seated in a chair facing an empty corner of the room. His eyes were open. His hands were raised as if to ward something off. And on the wall behind him, scratched into the plaster with what appeared to be fingernails, were symbols that the tribal elders immediately recognized, symbols that had not been used since before the white men arrived. Symbols that were meant to seal doors between worlds. The second death occurred 3 months later. Then another, then another. Over the next decade, 12 of the 14 Apache warriors of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 died under circumstances that defied explanation. Heart failure in healthy men, accidents that seemed impossible, and always the telltale signs, the symbols on the walls, the frozen expressions of terror, the lingering sensation among those who found them that something had been in the room, something that had departed only moments before. By 1957, only 2 of the original 14 remained. Goyakla, the leader, and Joseph Nez, the men who would later grant the sole interview about the unit's actions. They resided on opposite ends of the reservation, rarely seeing each other, rarely speaking to anyone about the war. But they knew they were being watched. They knew that whatever had followed them back from Europe was still there, waiting, patient, eternal. Goyakla died in 1963 at the age of 62. He was found in the desert 5 miles from any road or structure, sitting cross-legged facing the rising sun. There was no indication of how he had arrived there, no footprints in the sand around him, no vehicle tracks. It was as if he had simply materialized in that spot, or as if something had transported him there. The tribal elders who prepared his body for burial reported that his face bore an expression they had never witnessed before. Not fear, not peace, something else entirely, something that suggested he had finally seen what lay on the other side of the door he had opened so many years prior. Joseph Nez lived until 1984, the last survivor of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7. In his final years, he became something of a recluse, living in a small house at the edge of the reservation, surrounded by objects and symbols that visitors found disturbing. He gave the interview in 1979, 5 years before his death. And the words he spoke that day suggested that even after decades, the door remained open. He said, "People inquire if I regret what we did in the war. I tell them, no, we saved lives, American lives, lives that would have been lost if we had not done what we did, but I also tell them that there is always a price. The universe does not give without taking. The spirits do not serve without demanding something in return. We gave them a door. We gave them a way through. And now they are here, in this world among us. You cannot see them unless you know how to look. You cannot hear them unless you know how to listen. But they are here. They have always been here since we opened that door in 1943. And they will be here forever." When Joseph Nez died, his body was found in his home, surrounded by the symbols and objects he had amassed over 40 years. But there was something else in that room. Something that the police officers who responded to the call would never forget. Photographs. Hundreds of photographs covering every wall. Photographs of people that Joseph Nez had never met. People from cities across America. People from other countries. Men, women, children, all photographed without their knowledge. All photographed from angles that suggested the camera was not being held by human hands. The investigation into these photographs was quietly closed after 2 weeks. The official explanation was that Joseph Nez had been suffering from dementia and had collected random images from magazines and newspapers. But the photographs were not from magazines. They were original prints, and some of them depicted people who had not yet been born when Joseph Nez died. People who would not exist until years in the future. People whose faces appeared in those photographs exactly as they would look decades later. The files on Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 remain classified to this day. The few documents that have been released through Freedom of Information Act requests are heavily redacted, with entire pages blacked out, entire sections removed. Official military history makes no mention of the unit. The men who served in it are remembered only by their families. And those families have learned not to ask questions, not to delve too deeply into what their fathers and grandfathers did during the war. But the door remains open. In 1992, a group of hikers in the mountains of New Mexico reported seeing figures moving through the forest at night. Figures that did not walk, but glided. Figures that spoke in languages the hikers did not recognize. One of the hikers, a man named David Thornton, took photographs of what he saw. When the film was developed, it showed nothing but trees and darkness. But in one photograph, in the corner, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, there was a face. A face that did not belong to any of the hikers. A face that seemed to be looking directly at the camera from a place that was not quite in this world. In 2008, A construction crew working on a new highway near the Arizona-New Mexico border unearthed a buried structure that archaeologists could not explain. The structure contained symbols identical to those found in the homes of the deceased Apache warriors. It contained objects that appeared to be thousands of years old, yet showed no signs of decay. And it contained something else. A doorway. A doorway that led nowhere, that opened onto solid rock, yet somehow seemed to continue into depths that could not be measured. The construction project was halted. The site was sealed. The workers were reassigned to other projects and told never to speak of what they had found. But some of them did speak, and some of them reported that in the weeks and months after leaving that site, they began to experience things. Figures in their rooms at night, voices in languages they did not understand, the feeling of being watched by something that was not human. The legacy of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 continues to this day. The door they opened in 1943 remains open. The things that came through that door remain among us. And the sacrifice those 14 Apache warriors made to win a war has echoed through the decades, touching lives in ways that most people never suspect. Perhaps you have felt it yourself. That moment late at night when you are certain someone is watching you. That shadow in the corner of your vision that disappears when you turn to look. That voice whispering just below the threshold of hearing, speaking words in a language that feels older than human memory. Perhaps you have dismissed these experiences as imagination, as tricks of the tired mind, as nothing more than the echoes of primal fears. But perhaps they are something more. Perhaps they are reminders that the universe is larger than we know. That there are forces beyond our understanding. That doors once open can never be fully closed, and that the price of victory is sometimes paid by generations yet unborn. The Apache warriors knew this. They accepted this. They carried this burden so that others would not have to. And in doing so, they became something more than soldiers. They became guardians of a threshold, protectors of a boundary between worlds, sentinels standing watch over a door that can never be shut. If you are watching this and you have felt these things, if you have seen shadows that should not exist or heard voices that no one else can hear, know that you are not alone. Know that what you are experiencing is real. And know that there is only one protection against the darkness that waits on the other side of that open door. That protection is faith. Faith in something greater than ourselves. Faith in a power that transcends the physical world. Faith in God and in Jesus Christ, who offers us light in the darkness and shelter from the storms that rage in realms we cannot see. The Apache warriors knew the old ways, the ways of spirits and powers that existed before any religion we know today. But even they understood that some forces are too great to be faced alone. Even they, in their final moments, called upon something greater than themselves, something eternal, something divine. In a world where doors have been opened that should have remained closed, where shadows walk among us and voices whisper from beyond the veil, our only refuge is in the light of truth, the light of love, the light of a God who sees all, knows all, and offers salvation to all who seek it. The Apache warriors of Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 are gone now. Their names have been forgotten. Their deeds have been erased from official history. But what they opened remains. And what they faced still waits in the darkness, watching, patient, eternal. The question is not whether the door exists. The question is whether you are prepared for what might come through it. And the answer to that question depends on where you place your faith. Choose wisely. The darkness is listening.